Good afternoon, and welcome to the Law Society of British Columbia's virtual town hall. My name is Jasmine Ahmed. I'm a bencher from Vancouver County, and I'll be moderating today's town hall. In a sign of the times, I'm joined remotely by Law Society President Craig Ferris QC, as well as Don Avison QC, who is the Executive Director and Chief Executive Officer of the Law Society. Before we begin, I want to thank each of you for joining us today. The last couple of months certainly have been challenging. I know that you have a lot on your plate, so we appreciate the time that you've taken to join us today with your questions and to provide feedback on how the Law Society can assist you and your clients get through the crisis that we're currently experiencing. And hopefully beyond that as well. I know that you'll have a lot of questions. We only have an hour for today's session, so let's get started. We're first going to hear from Craig Ferris, President of the Law Society, who is going to discuss and have a few remarks on some of the initiatives that the Law Society has taken to respond to the impacts of the COVID-19 crisis. And he'll also outline a recovery plan for moving forward. Both Craig and Don are going to respond to your questions and listen to your feedback. So before we get to the question part, some of you have already submitted questions when you signed up for today's town hall. For those of you who haven't, you still have the opportunity to do so during the next hour. If you're joining us by telephone, you can press *3 on your telephone and you'll be joined up with an operator who will take your question and they'll submit them to the queue of questions we have. If you're joining by live stream, you'll see a function on your screen prompting you to ask your question. You can just type in your question there where prompted. And again, question will be joined to the queue. And I'll try to get to as many of the questions as I can today. So with that, let's get started. And we'll hear from Craig Ferris, President of the Law Society.
Thank you, Jasmine. And thank you all for joining here today. I want to start by thanking the legal profession of British Columbia for your professionalism and your dedication to the practice over the last few weeks. It's been a trying time, and I think we all recognize the difficulties that people in all different types of practices have gone through, and so thank you. We've all had to worry about health risks just like everybody else. But we've also had to overcome procedural and process issues so we could continue to serve our clients and ensure access to justice so that the whole system didn't grind to a halt. It's been especially trying, I think, for people who practice in small firms or who are small practitioners. I've heard from many lawyers in those situations who are experiencing financial issues and are having a difficulty during these times. And rest assured, the messages that I've received are informing our response to the pandemic. Those whose business is primarily advocating for clients in court have been impacted by the emergency closure of the courts. Solicitors' practices have also been impacted. Solicitors found they couldn't get documents signed or affidavits signed without exposing themselves to a risk of harm. I've heard from a number of people who didn't want to risk harm to themselves by providing legal services. And so in the early days of the pandemic, what we were doing was issue spotting. Issues would pop up and we would try to deal with it. The idea was that we were trying to keep the system moving by essentially going around and dealing with whatever was apparent to be a snag in the system. And so we dealt and we worked with the courts on affidavits. We dealt and worked with the LTSA on land title filings. We dealt with articling and PLTCs, PLTC, both registration and forms, and getting those programs up and running. And we have been having ongoing conversations with the courts and with government to deal with access and to deal with the issue of how we continue operating without paper. I'd like to thank, on behalf of all of the lawyers in this province, this Law Society staff who've been really magnificent. They, within a week, were up and running remotely and all working pretty much in tandem to keep us running during the course of this pandemic. I'm joined by Don Avison, our Executive Director, here today. and Don is going to speak to matters further once I finish. But I want to just take a few more moments here. When it came to addressing the issue of affidavits, the courts looked to the Law Society for guidance of how that process would work using virtual commissioning, and it was the Law Society that was one of the drivers between that change that was made by the courts. Similar happened with the LTSA when the Attorney General Ministry was looking for how that process could be changed. It was people of the Law Society who really were part of that process and part of that change. I'd also like to acknowledge the staff at the Attorney General's Ministry and the Attorney General himself who've jumped in and they've worked hard to keep the justice system running. The courts and the government agencies have all shown a determination to our justice system to keep it running. Closer to home at the Law Society itself, we've tried and we're going to continue trying to implement measures to help lawyers. We've extended the deadline for the second installment of our indemnity fees, and we've developed remote-free CPD options that can be found on the COVID-19 response webpage. Our staff has developed guidance on how to set up a secure home office, along with a cloud computing checklist, and that's also on our webpage. And on our website, you'll also find a list of provincial and federal emergency benefits and programs and directions for how lawyers can pay. We've also modified our own processes to allow for virtual technologies for the administering of oaths and the swearing of declarations. I also issued a practice directive for the Law Society Tribunal that will enable us to continue our hearings using the Zoom platform. We've done a number of written hearings on paper hearings essentially over the last 6 or 7 weeks, and we're now moving to actually running live hearings virtually. What I've seen is that the problems that's happened from the pandemic have highlighted frailties or vulnerabilities in how justice has operated in British Columbia. We've seen problems. We've seen problems with moving around physical paper, the lack of the use of technology by many participants, and the pandemic has shown us that our reliance on the status quo in these situations has left the public vulnerable to a shutdown of the justice system. So what do we do moving forward? As you know, last week the province announced a restart plan. And later this week we expect the government to issue protocols for office workplaces that will guide you with respect to a safe return to your offices. The Law Society also has a recovery plan, which will involve keeping a lot of these reforms that we've put in place running. The pandemic has highlighted that we need to continue to build a more resilient and accessible justice system, not just for this crisis, but for the next crisis. Our justice system is a fundamental part of our constitutional system of government, and we're committed to making sure it continues to function. One of the lessons to me coming out of this crisis was how it felt to not have access to the courts, like many people don't have access to the courts normally. And as I mentioned and challenged the benchers at our last benchers meeting, we have to increase access. And we need to make sure that we're using technologies to allow the greatest access that we can to both legal advice and our justice system. At the last benchers meeting, which we held virtually, I spoke to the benchers about how a pandemic can be a real impetus for permanent positive change, and that our work, far from being on hold, is more urgent than ever. And so we're going to continue that work, and a lot of the questions that we've seen and that we'll answer today really looks at the questions that we're going to be addressing over the next few months. I also want to say that the courts have been doing their part. The Court of Appeal has essentially gone back to regular operations virtually. The BC Supreme Court has also expanded its operations, and it's continuing to attempt to push out the boundaries of what it can do without requiring physical appearances, but also testing what can be done in a healthy situation. The Provincial Court has also expanded its operations, and I can say that on behalf of the Law Society, I've spoken to all the 2 Chief Justices and the Chief Judge, and I thank them for all the efforts that they've made to keep the courts open as much as they possibly can. The silver lining in this crisis is its unleashed transformation that will hopefully, over the future, make us a quicker, more decisive, more innovative legal profession while maintaining our core principles. And as we move forward, I look forward to hearing from you on reforms and improvements that we should be pursuing. And I'm confident that we'll emerge from this as better, more nimble, and more accessible lawyers. So with that, I'm just going to pass it over to Don Avison for some introductory comments from him. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Craig. And I thought what I would do is walk through a number of things that have been happening at the Law Society over the course of the last couple of months since the declaration by the Provincial Health Officer. Even in the week before the order was made, we had begun to do some work with some individuals with underlying conditions to have them working remotely. And after the order was made, pretty well the transition of the entire office took place within a 72-hour period of time. Enabled by some extraordinary assistance from our information and technology and information support team that did a remarkable job of getting people set up and working remotely. So I thought perhaps what I could do is just give a quick overview and what's happening in most of the units within the Law Society. Professional conduct, for example, we're able to get back up and operational very quickly in intake and early resolution with the investigations and monitoring group and also with the discipline group. There's been quite a bit of use of technology. Mr. Ferris mentioned this earlier about some of the virtual technology that has been utilized, and the most recent meeting of the Discipline Committee, chaired by Jasmine Ahmad, took place using Zoom technology. As was mentioned, the bencher meeting that took place at the end of April was done using Zoom technology as well, with member services and credentials. We've had some challenges in that area, but I think it's been back up operational and working reasonably effectively over the course of the last several weeks. Policy committees have started meeting again, and it's my expectation that by the time we get to the next bencher meeting on the 29th of May, all of the policy committees will have met using the technology that's now available to us. Some areas presented some different kinds of challenges. So, for example, in the PLTC program, the nature of the program is a hands-on experiential program, and the challenges of the epidemic created a situation where we had to seriously reconsider how we offered the programming in a very short period of time. And I give a great deal of credit to the PLTC leadership and to the instructors who, within the matter of a very short period of time, developed a virtual classroom offering that is now back up and operational. I think the instruction on interviewing took place over the course of the last week or so, and they're actually doing the assessments right now. Examinations will be conducted with the use of remote proctoring in the next short while, and the next session will commence a little bit later than what had been anticipated. It'll be about a week later than we had originally planned for, but it will, again, through the availability of the technology, we'll still be able to complete that on the scheduled date or at the end of the first week in August. Lots of optimism in relation to whether or not we might be able to deliver at least part of that in person, but it's not lost on me that pretty much every post-secondary institution in the province is looking at remote delivery and online delivery into the fall, so we'll be guided by some of that as well. Trust assurance and accounting over the course of the past 2 months. It's been surprising to me that we've been able to conduct quite a bit of that work with electronic audits that have been done with the willingness of a lot of firms. There are some challenges in relation to the direct audits, and we're working with firms trying to be as flexible as we can possibly be through this period of time. We did about 675 audits last year, which historically was the high water mark. We won't be able to achieve that threshold this year with the challenges that we currently face, but I've been very impressed with the work that's been done by that group. The group has also put together 3 new web-based or webinar-delivered programs that will be delivered shortly in relation to the essentials of trust accounting, an introduction to anti-money laundering initiatives and things of that nature. The Lawyers Indemnity Group have been very impressive in maintaining their productivity levels throughout the course of the challenges of the pandemic under the profoundly effective leadership of Sue Forbes, QC. So really appreciate the work that they've done. A lot of you will have seen regular communications through the notices to the profession from our communications group. We've tried to get as much information out there as we can without overwhelming everyone with too much information. So that's likely to continue over the course of the next couple of months as we try to stay ahead of and keep you ahead of the information that you need to be able to practice effectively. We've also been involved with the COVID-19 response team that was set up by the Ministry of the Attorney General, and that's something that you've heard a little bit about in the media, and I anticipate that you'll hear more about over the course of the next while. So I think by way of general comment, I'll leave it there. We've got other matters like the Cullen Commission that reconvenes on the 25th of May, where the Law Society is an active participant. There are a number of areas where there are questions, so I'll leave it at that for the moment so we can cover as many questions as we can.
Okay. Thank you, Craig and Don, and thank you very much for those comprehensive remarks. I'm going to touch a little bit on a few of those points you've raised, and which are incorporated in the questions we received. The first one I want to talk about is technology, and you've both talked about how the Law Society has incorporated that in the operations of its business and the regulatory function. We have a question here that talks about the use of technology from the lawyer's perspective. And the question is this: I'm interested to know whether and how the Law Society will continue to incorporate technology into how lawyers may incorporate law, for example, continuing to allow affidavits to be sworn virtually. And I'll just add to that, perhaps, and how lawyers can fulfill their regulatory obligations, trust accounting, trust reporting, those sorts of things. How can we use technologies to make life easier for the lawyers?
Thank you, Jasmine. So this is, I think, sort of maybe the fundamental question that comes out of the pandemic, which is which of these changes is going to be made permanent. And my view of it is that most of them should be made permanent. I think what we're demonstrating during the course of the pandemic is that a lot of the rules that we had in place were in place and became rules as opposed to reflecting our core principles. And so with respect to remote commissioning of affidavits with the available technology, the idea of commissioning the affidavit is to assure that it's genuine and is the person's sworn evidence. And we should, I think we've demonstrated that you can do that using technology. And I wouldn't see any reason why that would change. I think also the use of technology through the hearing process, through the meeting process, again, I think that is something that is here to stay, that is not going to change. Similarly with the LTSA. Within the Law Society, a number of processes, the idea of being able to interact more on a web basis or an electronic basis with the Law Society, the ability to not have to file or send paper for certifications. All of those changes, I think, will become permanent. And I think allowing lawyers to do the same through a review of our rules to ensure that technology, our rules don't get in the way of lawyers using technology, is something that will be part of the restart plan for the Law Society. I don't know, Don, if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I do, because I think one of the things that we've talked about with the senior staff here at the Law Society is, as we go through this, let's not forget the lessons that we've learned from it. So to the extent that we can, we need to incorporate the use of technology as much as we can in our practices. So I think you're going to see it a whole lot more in relation to some of the things that we do on the trust accounting side and what we do in relation to professional conduct generally. We'd already been doing quite a bit of work in relation to using some of the processes similar to what the Civil Resolution Tribunal does with AI in their decision trees, beginning to move that into the work that we do in intake and early resolution. And the next step there, I think, will be to move more of that into the member services component, which we're pretty optimistic about in terms of being able to deliver a better product more rapidly. So we see this as a tremendous opportunity to capture a number of changes and frankly, to build on those in the months ahead.
Thank you both for that. As we're talking about technology, a couple of questions have just popped up about specific issues. One of them, are the benchers making any efforts to enable the remote execution of wills or enduring powers of attorney? What role or focus does the Law Society have in those sorts of issues?
That's certainly an
Well,
issue that we and other organizations have been consulting with the government on, and I am hopeful that there will be progress in that regard. So stay tuned.
Okay, thank you. Um, we're just going to move on from technology for a little bit for now. And one of the more common questions we've been having relates to the financial impact of the COVID crisis. And like many business owners in the province, lawyers are facing the broader economic consequences of this crisis. And many have concerns about the financial viability of their practices. So relating to that, we do have a number of questions. I'm going to just kind of group them all into one or two questions for you. One of the questions that we received was, has there been any consideration of permitting a payment plan option for the dues that are due to the Law Society? And a related one is, has there been any consideration of payment by credit card for those dues?
Thanks,
we're
Jasmine.
actually
Sorry, Don. Let me just jump in here 1 second, then I'll let you talk about the specifics, because I want everybody who's on the call to understand that this has been sort of one of the main focuses of the benchers in this crisis. I've heard lots about from people who are having financial issues and difficulties, and our first bencher meeting after the crisis hit, we passed some rules which allowed us to delay payments. And that's allowed us to delay the installment payment for the indemnity insurance, and we'll be looking at delaying payment for the second half of the practice fees at our next bencher meeting as well. We needed to get the rule changes in place to allow us to do that. So with respect to the specifics of how you pay, how often is paid, what method you can pay, Don can speak to the specifics, but I'll just tell you this, that will be at the top of our agenda over the balance of the year, and I would expect you'll see some movement on that issue before fees are due next year.
Thank you.
I can add
Don?
to that it's been an area of discussion for a number of weeks now, and Craig and I have had a number of conversations. I anticipate that this is an issue that we'll discuss further at the executive committee that takes place this weekend and the bencher meeting that happens on the 29th of May. We're in the budget development process right now for next year. And we're actively looking at a number of options with respect to installments that are different than what lawyers have seen in the past. We're in a very different situation. So all options are on the table for consideration. The credit card option has been raised by a number of people, so we will be looking at that. It does carry with it some implications around costs, but we're exploring all of the opportunities that are available to us that are responsive to the needs of members in these very challenging circumstances that we're facing now, and the kinds of challenges that we think may lie ahead over the course of the coming months.
Well, thank you to you both. Also, in respect of fees, one of the other questions other than installment plans is, will there be a reduction of fees for any short-term or long-term period of time?
So I think Don said it best, where he said all options are on the table. I think it's really important that we don't come out of this pandemic with less access to legal services or to the courts than we had beforehand. And so that would mean having less legal service providers available to help people. And so we'll be committed to making sure that those people most at risk of being harmed and from this pandemic and not being able to continue to practice receive some help. Now, I can't commit the bencher table to doing any particular course of action. I'm one vote at the table, but I can tell you that it's high on my agenda to make sure that the benchers actively consider what kind of help can be provided to get people through this crisis.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to move on now. We have been talking about lawyers and their practice, but of course this also affects, and some would say more so, young lawyers and articling students. So a number of questions that we have been raised about PLTC and about articling. I'm going to start with the current PLTC students. For those of us joining us today, the question is, has a date been set as to when the examination date will occur for candidates seeking to qualify for and join the profession? So what is happening on the PLTC students?
So as I mentioned earlier on, the program got back up and operational within a relatively short period of time. The interviewing assessments are taking place right now, and then they'll move towards the completion of the examination. So dates have been set for that. We'll put something up on the website that provides a greater degree of clarity on that front. There have been communications directly with principals and with students in PLTC. The expectation is, I think I mentioned earlier, is that with the summer session that will commence about a week later than usual, but we'll finish at the same time. I think it's pretty clear that we're going to have to look at the likelihood of remote completion of the examinations there as well. We're concentrating as much energy as we can on addressing the needs of those who are in line to be called, which also raises the question of call ceremonies. We did manage to complete a couple of larger call ceremonies on the 13th of March, just before the order went into place from the provincial health officer about confining gatherings to 50 people or less. So we also are doing some work to look at how we'll address the issue of call ceremonies over the course of the coming months as students become eligible for completion. So there's a lot of work on that front. There's been a lot of direct communication with students that are in PLTC, and we're trying to resolve and address the uncertainties for those who are not yet in the program. But I'm pretty satisfied with the work that's been done by the PLTC leadership and by the instructors. Not only to deliver the program, but as I'm sure you can understand, they're spending a lot of time dealing with the concerns of students who are again, understandably, pretty anxious about what the current situation presents. So they're not just instructing. I think a lot of instructors have been providing counseling assistance to students as well as they go through the program, and I appreciate all the work that they've been doing in that regard.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
So
let
in
me
it,
just add this.
of
Sorry,
course.
if I could just add this one little piece. The use of technology in PLTC is one of those areas that we can test while this pandemic goes on. And it may very well be that some of those changes become permanent as well if through this process we discover that they're as viable, they're less expensive, and it allows us to offer the course in a better way for our students. And so that's one of the ways that we're able to test in a way that we haven't been able to do before.
Thank you. Well, of course, the other group of young lawyers or young people who are being affected are articling students. And we have a number of questions that have come from both the articling students and the principals who have hired the articling students. One of the questions I have here is, what will happen to articling students in firms that may not survive the pandemic or simply cannot continue to afford to keep on an articling student? What happens in that case? Will the articling period be reduced, or what are some of the options that are available to the parties in that situation?
Right. So I can say that what we've been doing right to date is we've been following the changes that have been made at different parts of the country. Saskatchewan has reduced articles to 8 months. But we've also been following the data in BC to really try to determine what students have been impacted on this question. What we don't want to do is create a situation where people reduce articles because they can. And so if our preference is trying to keep articles where they are if it's possible. But that will obviously be dependent upon how the numbers sort of flow through over the next little while. So it's something we're studying. We don't have any changes to announce at the present time.
Okay.
Jasmine, if I
And
can, I think I should add that we've also made some changes or provided some more clarity in relation to remote supervision of students. So the rules were fairly tight in relation to students having to be within the office, and all of that became much more difficult with the pandemic. So we have put information out to students and to their principals about a much more flexible approach on that front, we're going to be doing everything we can to try to make sure that we get people to their call dates as effectively as we can over the course of the next while, despite the challenges.
Okay, thank you for that. And that answered my next question and one of the questions that we had from a online viewer today. So thank you for that. I'm going to move on now to some of the more day-to-day issues that are being experienced on the litigation side of it, on the solicitor side of it. Obviously, these are everyday stressors and getting the basic things done that just simply can't be done anymore. Don, you talked about the affidavits and working with the court about getting affidavits sworn, and so that is something that was much appreciated. Some of the questions are talking about disservice, for example. I have a question here. I can't find it, but the question was, the rules of court still allow for service by fax. Is there any consideration of working with the courts to have service by email so that people aren't going to be required to be in the office to accept service of those documents?
It's a question that's come up a couple of times, not one where I think we've got anything that we can add today, but one that we'll take a serious look at.
Okay.
Yeah, when I saw that question come through, I thought, well, that actually makes a lot of sense, and that's something we should be raising, and so we'll do that.
Okay. And a lot of the questions I have here have to do with the courts and the court system. And maybe I'm going to ask a question, and maybe you can also tell us what role that the Law Society has in the operations of the court systems. I have an online question. Any idea when civil trials will resume? They require a trial management conference. It's each month, a month before the trial. But those rules are in abeyance. So the general question is, when are we back to normal at the courthouse?
Yeah, so that's a hard question, and I'm not sure anybody really knows the answer at this point in time. So our role with the courts is to be a sounding board for ideas, to try to bring ideas to them, to explain to them the concerns of our members, the difficulties that a lack of access to the courts are presenting. And we've done all that. And as I said in my introductory remarks, the courts have been very responsive, and they're trying very hard to try to correct a problem which creates major issues, especially for trials. It's a little bit easier to do appeal hearings remotely than it is to have live witnesses. And so the courts are listening, and they're trying to get the door open as quickly, as safely as they can. And I understand as right at this week, the BC Supreme Court is testing a couple of courtrooms where they've installed some barriers and cleaning apparatus to try to see if that courtroom would work properly for an in-person trial. And so I think that everyone in the system is working to try to do it as quickly as safely as possible. But I can't give you a guarantee on it. When I spoke at the beginning about talking about the vulnerabilities and the frailties in the system, I think some of those have been built up over time, and they can't be easily overcome on the fly. And a lot of good hard work has been done on the fly to get them open as far as they are right now. But you can be assured that it's a message that I take to the courts every time I get a chance to speak to them, is that it's very impactful on the members and the public to not be able to get access to the courts. And I think the courts understand that, and they're working hard to open the doors.
We're kind of all going through this right now. So I'm in the Law Society building today, and there's been an extraordinary amount of work with the physical infrastructure, with lines on the floors and a number of signs up to accommodate the return of people to work, which we hope will begin to happen over the course of the next couple of weeks. More correctly, the return to the office, because they've been working throughout the whole of this. I've been very impressed by the Ministry of the Attorney General and by court services and the work that they're doing as well to try to do their part in getting the courts open. The challenges in some cases are a whole lot greater. And so I don't think we know the answer to the question, but I can tell you that the level of diligence that we've seen from the Deputy Attorney General and his staff as they work towards trying to make that date come closer to us has been very high.
Thank you. Well, as you mentioned, we have seen in the past few days an indication that we're going to be opening up the economy, and that is going to be that people are returning to the physical work service or the work area. We have a question here about that, and we have a couple questions about that, and I'll give you the first one. Since COVID-19 is transmitted by people who do not have symptoms, will you require mandatory continuous testing of court personnel, judges, lawyers, and participants who attend open court sessions? Any thought about
Yeah.
that?
Well, I think that's beyond the jurisdiction of the Law Society. We certainly will take a look at what procedures the courts put in place to try to make sure that the courts are a safe workplace for us and for witnesses and the public generally. And we could bring any concerns we have in that regard to the courts. But I think, like Don said, everyone in government and court services and the Ministry of the Attorney General is very focused on safety and health. And I think we can take some comfort in that, in ensuring that they're going to do this in a safe and proper manner. I don't foresee a situation where the courts are requiring people to come into an unsafe or unhealthy workplace.
Okay. And then we
I
have
think
a question. Sorry, Don.
No, I think it's pretty clear that safety of the public and safety of the profession has been uppermost in the minds of the courts from the beginning of all of this. I know Chief Judge Gillespie in the provincial court has been very focused on that, while at the same time trying to be as flexible as possible around making it possible to deal with liberty matters, deal with child protection matters, and a number of other urgent cases that require the court's attention. But safety has been critical throughout all of that as the top of mind issue.
Okay. And on that note, then, as we return to the physical office, will the Law Society be issuing any guidance for how we do that, how we meet with clients, how we conduct our practices and meetings in the office? Has there been consideration of that? Or Don?
Yeah, we've been sharing some information about best practices already, and trying to share information about what was coming from the provincial government and what was coming from the federal government more on the financial side. So where we see information that we consider to be useful for the profession, or where we think some of the things that we've done at the Law Society with our return to office planning, where that will be helpful, we'd be happy to post some of that through notices to the profession as well.
Okay. And we've talked a little bit about the court system, and of course the communications, the ongoing communications that the Law Society, Craig and Don, I know you both have had, but continue to do that. Of course, I don't want to focus only on the litigators. The solicitors have also had their challenges in the day-to-day practices as well. I do have a question here about probate, and it says the Law Society needs to help solicitors as well. We are left in a situation where probate is frozen. Uncontested probate applications are not proceeding. Is the Law Society doing anything about it?
Yeah, that's a concern that's been brought to our attention, and that's a concern that we have raised in through our consultation process, because that obviously is something which needs to be dealt with. We can't have probate not functioning. There was some concern about the filing of original documents on probate files, but I do know that is something that was under active work within the court system. I don't know, Don, if you can add to that.
It's an issue that we've raised both with the courts and also with the Ministry of the Attorney General. So I think it is getting some attention, and there is a recognition that that's an area that has to continue, and one where there ought not to be significant impediments to getting back to business as normal as much as we can.
Okay, well, thank you for that. So those are some of the day-to-day issues as well. I'm going to go back to the use of technology, because I'm getting a few questions on the use of technology, and someone raises a question here Can you address any issues that you anticipate might arise with respect to solicitor-client privilege through the use of technology? Certainly, we've seen the stories about Zoom and the security issues through using that. Has any thought been given about that, or are we waiting for those issues to arise?
No, I think that's been top of mind when we've talked about running hearings, providing for private breakout rooms, etc., with respect to the technology and how secure the technology is. I think that that's something which is going to continue to evolve, and rules will continue to be needed to be looked at to ensure that lawyers are following best practices with respect to the use of video technology, and some tips on how that technology is used. We're going to have to be careful in this sort of brave new world to not use things we don't know how they work and what the various features are, and then where there's a record button or who has the ability to let people enter. So all of those issues I think need to be addressed, and there needs to be some training with respect to the use of technology. But at the end of the day, we're going to have to, just like we did with cell phones or emails, we're going to have to work hard to make sure that we're maintaining solicitor-client privilege, because it's effectively the cornerstone of the legal practice. And so I can't tell you that we have a list of new guidelines today, but that's certainly something that's on our radar to be addressing as part of our sort of restart plan for the new world that we're entering.
Okay. Don, do you have something to add to that?
Well,
Is
yeah,
that
the technology has been changing pretty rapidly, so it's been really quite fascinating to see where there have been some concerns about security coming up, that those have been addressed, and I think that's going to continue as we get deeper into this. But the availability of the technology to respond to some of the issues that we face has been pretty remarkable. We have had some information out by way of notice to the profession about some of the things that lawyers need to keep in mind in preserving the confidentiality of their clients. And there too, as we continue to see useful information on that front, websites or other materials will share that.
okay? Thank you. And we still have a few more minutes here, but before I do want to touch on an issue before we end, and I think it's an important one with all of the uncertainty that has been created over the last 2 months. It's remarkable. It's only been 2 months. The one certainty we have had is the impact on the mental wellness or the mental health of many lawyers in their province. We're faced with stressors on the job. We're faced with concerns about the mental and physical health of our family and loved ones. Can you tell me what resources are available to lawyers who are struggling to varying degrees with the impact of COVID-19?
Right. So I did post a video message which is on the website if people want to watch it. But the resources that the Law Society have are all available remotely. So the Legal Lawyers Assistance Program, LAP, is available remotely. They're conducting remote meetings, and that program is fully operational. The resources that we have, the help numbers are available. And I'm drawing a blank on the name of our service provider, but that service provider is providing resourcing, counseling virtually through the contact information we have on the website. So maybe Don can give me the name.
Yeah, LifeWorks is the name of the group that provide the services. I'd also mention one of our great assets in the profession, the Lawyers Assistance Program, that's also available. And if I could just add a couple of things on this. Throughout the course of all of this, I've had the opportunity to talk to a number of lawyers. I think probably what was most compelling for me was talking to sole practitioners who had small office space, were trying to get documents executed with clients in circumstances where they were frankly frightened about the situation and quite concerned. And that was deeply motivating in relation to some of the work that we did working with others to try to resolve the issue around affidavits. But it was impossible going through all of that not to come away with a pretty clear understanding that the wear and tear on the mental health of members of the profession, really everybody that's going through this, is pretty high, in many cases higher than others. So I would urge people to take advantage of what's available through LifeWorks. That's what it's there for, through LAP, and there are resources available through the public health system as well. So anything we can do, if members have questions about that, we're always happy to hear from you directly through practice advice and more directly where we can provide that information or direct you to somebody that can help, we'll do that. But I think LifeWorks and LAP are the places to start.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for that. I was actually going through the website over the past few days and remarked about the resources that are there. And just to let the lawyers who are watching and listening know that if you go to the website, on the vertical ribbon on the left-hand side, you'll see the menu and support and resources. And then click again for lawyer wellness and personal support. And you will see the contact information for both LifeWorks and Lawyers Assistance Program. I do think those are important resources and that should be used as well as the practice advisors as well. Now, of course, during this pandemic, our obligations as lawyers aren't ending. We have obligations to the client. We also have our regulatory obligations to fulfill as well, including our CPD credits. What is the Law Society doing to assist, or are they reducing the hours that are required for CPD? Can you tell us about that? We all want a reduction.
Sure. Well, so Jasmine, we start from the proposition that our goal here is to make sure that we have a competent legal profession that's able to serve the public, and that's really the intention of the CPD program, to ensure that that commitment we make to the public is unwavering. And so the first thing that we did is we published a list of free courses that are available on our website, on which Jasmine just referred to, that lawyers can access for free to try to make up those credits. That being said, we do understand that there's different demands on people right now, and taking some of the CPD hours may be difficult in certain circumstances. And so we actually were discussing this morning, and it's something that we will continue to discuss, and hopefully we'll bring a proposal to the benchers within the next couple of months as some way where a commitment may be able to be relaxed somewhat to allow some carryover to next year to complete some of the courses, just to make sure that we're not overburdening people when they're trying to balance busy lives with kids not at school, practicing law, and dealing with client issues. So I think, again, that's a stay tuned, but it's on our agenda, it's on our radar, and I would expect some resolution of that.
Okay, thank you. What are some of the other resources that lawyers can use? For example, I'm having some questions here about, are you going to increase the ability, currently, the trust assurance courses are only available to 50 people at a time. The reality is that some people might now have more time to be taking courses like at that. Will those types of courses be made bigger so that more people could be taking those courses at one time?
Well, we'll look at that option, but we'll also look at offering more of them. The value of doing the course with the 50 people is that it provides for the opportunity for direct engagement. And we found that very useful with the course in the past, where people have the chance then to ask the questions that are most relevant to them. So it may be a combination of seeing what we could do to expand the size of the classes, but also provide a greater number of them over the course of the next couple of months, which I think we can do.
Okay, thank you. And so I just have a couple more questions here about just the general return to the physical office. Is there any contemplation by the Law Society that they're going to make any mandatory testing? We see that temperatures are being taken at various public places as well. Any suggestion or contemplation of doing that for law firms or other places where members of the public may be obtaining legal services?
It's not something that we're at this point in time thinking about in terms of an obligation on individual law firms. I think they should be guided by what they're hearing from the provincial health officer on that front. I can tell you that there are a number of guidelines that we're putting in place, a number of expectations with the return to office at the Law Society itself, designed to make sure that people are as safe as possible. But at this point, it does not include mandatory temperatures.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll just add to that, Jasmine. I just add to that. Just one of our limitations is that we're not health officers. We take our directions from the health officer, just like all other British Columbians do, and we work within the guidelines that are provided by the health officer and will be provided by WorkSafe BC. And so those entities are really the experts with respect to those matters. And if they suggest to us that that's the right way to do it, well, then we'll act on that. But I don't foresee us adding to requirements published by either WorkSafe or the provincial health officer.
Okay. Thank you. I'm seeing getting to the end of most of these questions. I mean, I haven't hit all of them in detail, but I think the categories have all been covered off here. Don, just as a general recap, what are you hearing from people, and what can people expect from the Law Society, and generally speaking, and if they have further questions, who should they be contacting at the Law Society?
Well, I can start with me. So it depends on what the nature of the question is. So we're getting a number of questions in relation to trust assurance, and probably those are most efficiently answered by going directly to the trust assurance department. Other questions of a general nature to practice advice, but I've received a fair number of calls. It's actually been very helpful to do that. So I welcome that from members of the profession. And our goal will be to try to turn around getting you an answer to whatever question you have within as short a period of time as we can.
Okay. And just to confirm, you touched on this briefly earlier, but the Law Society is fully operational. Everyone's available. They might be working remotely, but everyone is still there and able to answer questions and respond to the concerns and issues that the lawyers in the province might have. Is that correct?
Well, that's right. In fact, I'm amazed by the extent to which we were able to get back up and operational within a very short period of time, and that has been sustained. So the activity in relation to areas like the Lawyers Indemnity Fund continues pretty much as the same way it always has. Within professional conduct, that group is quite busy as well, and they've found that the technology serves them well. So in many of the areas, indeed in most of them, our productivity levels have remained really quite high.
Thank you. And Craig, do you have any final comments before we sign off on today's virtual town hall?
Thanks, Jasmine. So I just want to say thank you to everybody who attended. My plan as president had been to sort of travel around the province and to hopefully meet many of you and to take some information back to the Law Society about how different practices are responding to the regulatory requirements that we have. Obviously, that isn't going to happen this year. Times change, things change, and my role as president has changed along with that. And so a lot of the more busy tasks of attending ceremonies and functions and giving speeches has fallen away. But what has increased to a great extent is a lot more of the thoughtful questions, policy questions that we need to address at the Law Society to make sure we've got a modern, resilient practice and justice system in this province. And that's really where we're going to be focusing for the remainder of the year. And so I welcome any suggestions about the use of technology, about how we can modernize or streamline our processes to make the system better for lawyers and for the public, to make sure that we are resilient and able to respond and turn on a dime if this was all to happen again, to make sure that the system continues to operate. And so if you have those suggestions, I'm happy to get on the call. I'm happy to take an email. Please contact me and reach out, because we're all in this together. You are members of the Law Society. Many of you listening here and watching here today, and that means that the Law Society is us. It's not us and them, it's us, and we all have a collective responsibility to try to make the system better. So thank you, and I thank you for attending today.
So thank you, Craig and Don, for your comments. That's been very helpful. I think that brings us to the conclusion of the question and answer period for today's town hall. I thank you all for joining us, and I thank you for your questions and feedback. We hope that you're able to provide you with the answers to some of your questions today. And I know that we will be continuing to listen to the feedback that you have. Remember to continue to look out for the notice to the profession that you'll be seeing in your inboxes and have been seeing in your inboxes. And as well, look at our website at lawsociety.bc.ca, which has a frequently asked questions section on the COVID-19 portion. On behalf of Don, Craig, my fellow benchers, I thank you for attending. Stay well, and we hope that you all take care. Thank you very much.